The focus of this lesson is on gender differences. And while the information that it contains is applicable to many different types of relationships, it's going to be presented within the context of marriage. And while it also presents a lot of information derived from psychological studies, neurological studies, so basically coming from psychology and medical sources, it's going to be presented in a way that applies to a Christian worldview and a Christian marriage, because our foundation is in the scriptures. And we know, as Jesus reminds us, the one time that he spoke on the topic of marriage, is that God made them male and female, and he designed them to become one in union through marriage. And that is described and depicted within the Genesis 1 and 2 account of creation. So we're going to be looking at gender differences. And while I will be citing information from these secular sources, what these secular sources do is actually confirm what scripture tells us. And it just allows us to have a little bit more nuance and understanding into the way that the brain works and different parts of the brain, and how all of that coincides with the design that God reveals to us in Scripture. So there's other lessons, there's other places I've taught on this subject. So some of it may be familiar to you, or you may encounter those lessons later. But this one is specific to understanding communication and being able to apply these differences in a way that allows us to work together better with our spouses. So I'm going to be sharing my screen and going through some slides, because some of the information I have for you is depicted through images, illustrations, and graphics. And so I hope that helps you to understand it a little bit better, and also to conceptualize some of the concepts and the points that I'll be making. Share my screen. Okay, so let's get going. Okay, so I'm going to go back and forth between some differences that research has bore out in the way that men and women use their brains. So men and women have the exact same structures in the brain, but the way that men and women tend to utilize those structures varies. And I think that the way that this usage varies, and the effect that difference makes, like I said, it supports the differences that is depicted in Scripture and portrayed in Scripture between men and women, and specifically God's design for husbands and wives. So the first part of the brain that I want to talk about is the amygdala. Everybody has an amygdala on the right side of their brain and another one on the left side of their brain. They are almond-shaped nuclei that sits at the base of the limbic system. I have it there on the screen as a yellow dot so that you can see where it is, okay? So while men and women both have right amygdalas and left amygdalas, men have a tendency to utilize their right amygdala more. In the research, it's called rightward asymmetry, because we do not use our amygdala symmetrically, meaning equally or evenly. Men tend to be asymmetrical toward the right. Women tend to be asymmetrical to the left. Now, along with that, we also know that it is larger. And I don't know if it kind of feels like a little bit of a chicken or the egg situation. Do the men have a larger right amygdala because they use it more, or do men use it more because it's larger? And we don't have the answer to that. All we know is that men tend to have a larger right amygdala, and they also tend to utilize it more than women do, and also more than they do their left. So what does the right amygdala do? It processes information that comes to them through image or picture form. And that is what makes men more reliant upon visual stimulation and visual input when making decisions. It supports the idea of them being the hunters and the warriors, and being able to rely on their eyesight and the information they gather through their senses to understand a situation, to be able to recognize threats. Now, the stereotypes that are common for men, big screen TVs, sports, action movies, video games, even pornography. And if you think about it, all of those rely on visual stimulation, visual input, but they also many times depict things that would correspond to the role that a husband has within marriage. So, for example, sports, action movies, video games, a lot of times those correspond to what would otherwise be hunting or battle. And that is what the men were, the role that they were given by God was to be the protectors, the defenders, and the providers. So the right amygdala helps them to do this. So one way to kind of think about the amygdala is part of our radar system. It's what allows us to detect and therefore respond to perceived threats, problems, but also to perceive opportunities and take advantage of those. So for men using the right amygdala, it is an external focus. They tend to be scanning the external environment because that's the direction that the right amygdala is focused on. Whereas you'll see with the women, the left amygdala has more of an internal focus. It scans the internal state and it looks for signs internally to the body about whether or not there's a problem. So men are going to be focused more on situational awareness and the things that are going on around them than necessarily women are. And again, these are stereotypes. I'm going to be presenting this information in a very stereotypical fashion. And I want you to take all this information and picture it like on a spectrum of very strong to very weak. So you have men who are a lot stronger in this. They utilize their right amygdala a lot more than other men. So some men are just a lot more geared toward hunting, toward battle. They're more inclined to engage in this way in their life, in their hobbies, even their job. That doesn't mean that other men don't also have this ability. It just means they may not be activating it, utilizing it with the same frequency or the same intensity. And again, that also doesn't mean that those particular men are not good husbands, that they're not good providers, that they're not good protectors. This is now where we would have to factor in personality traits, life experiences, and things like that. Okay, so I'm just going to be focused on very broad, general, stereotypical gender differences, but each of you need to then interpret it to your unique situation. So if you're the man in the relationship, think about how this plays out for you. If you're the woman in the relationship, think about how this is depicted or displayed in your husband, but also you can consider your own parents, other people, other married couples that are in your life, and you'll notice that nuance that I'm talking about. Okay. But the application I want you to focus on right now is within your own relationship. So how does the man, the husband in your relationship, how does this apply to him? Okay. So the purpose for being visual, as I said, it allows men to quickly assess where there may be a potential threat or an opportunity. And the right amygdala is also responsible for processing those external events, including determining the nature of a situation. Now, based upon that determination, the right amygdala is the part of the brain that will signal for more testosterone. It will also signal for things like adrenaline and cortisol, but altogether that allows the man to be prepared for battle or to be prepared to, chase down something, run after something, whatever it may be. But also it's that specifically that increased testosterone that is what motivates competition, a sense of competition. So again, the individual person is going to vary in how competitive they feel or how easily triggered they are into a competitive state. But if you were to present a husband and wife in a threatening situation, this is what is happening inside of him in order to step up and protect his wife, protect his family, and respond to the threat. Or on the flip side, see an opportunity, take advantage of it in order to provide for his family. So that's the right amygdala. That's the direction that men tend to lean. And it doesn't mean they don't have the opposite side. And it doesn't mean that women don't have this side. Again, it's about strength and frequency of usage. So women mirror this. So while men have a larger, stronger right amygdala, and they tend to use that right amygdala more, Women are the mirror. They use the left amygdala. They have a larger one, they use it more. So, like I said before, if the right amygdala scans external environment, the left amygdala is scanning the internal environment. So, the left amygdala is processing emotions, relationships, those internal those internal experiences. So women tend to experience life through emotions and through relationships because of this left amygdala being larger and being her go-to, being her default. So women are going to be processing experiences more through the left amygdala, which factors in and filters in emotions and relationships and relational factors. And then the fact that women also have a higher affinity for language and a higher affinity for details, that also is coming from the left amygdala, but it includes the dynamic, the exchange, the interplay between the left amygdala and the fact that women have larger language centers of the brain. So you see that depicted on the screen. The left amygdala just mirrors the right. It's just in the left hemisphere instead of the right, but the larger language centers are on the outside of the brain. And again, stereotypes, women are stereotypically more touchy-feely, more emotional. They tend to be stereotyped as talking a lot more. Now, I know that there are a lot of men who like to talk too. I know there are a lot of men who also enjoy conversation and relationships and things like that. And they may also have a fairly large left amygdala, or they may be versed in accessing and utilizing their left amygdala. But what I'm saying is, day in, day out in their roles, what allows them to honor the way that God designed husbands and wives. And it's going to be these tendencies. So it's not that women can't respond to threats. Trust me, if somebody were to threaten my children, I'm going to go into mama bear mode. My right amygdala is going to fire. It's just not going to necessarily be as strong or as quick or as versed as it would if my husband was there responding to that threat instead. So again, it doesn't mean we don't have it. It's just more talking about your default. So the purpose for the left amygdala being stronger in women, okay, why did God factor this into his design? Well, because as the men go off and hunt and fight, the women stay together. So kind of picture pre-civilization, kind of the nomadic tribal time that humanity lived in. Men would go out and hunt, or men would go out and fight, and the women would stay behind and they would work together. They would take care of responsibilities. They would care for the children. They would, be the ones who were foraging, right? And watching over the homestead or the camp. They lived in community. They coordinated within the larger context of community. And that's one reason why she tends to process things out loud. She tends to be more verbal about her emotional state or about her concerns about, being able to collaborate and cooperate and work as a team, because that is part of her nature and it's part of the way that God designed women. And also it factors in these other parts of the brain, like I said. So again, it's not that men can't, it's just what's the tendency? Well, men tend to process internally. And then they verbalize when they either have made a decision or they need input. So women tend to verbalize and process verbally. They process out loud. So they're still talking through as they're figuring it out. And this has created a very common conflict within marriage where she wants to vent. She wants to process out loud. She wants to talk through her feelings and her experiences. And he's sitting here waiting for either the solution or the request for help, because that's his nature, right? He tends to process internally first and then communicate outwardly. So it's almost like unconsciously, he's thinking, okay, if she's talking about it, that must mean she either has a solution. And that's where the husband might say, do you have a point? Are you going to get to your point soon? Kind of like, why are you sharing all of this? Or he's going to assume she needs his help to answer it or solve it, where that may not be what she's asking for at all. But again, his default is going to be, she either has a solution or a point, or she needs my help. On the flip side, when women are asking their husbands to talk more. They're asking him to verbalize his process because she wants to be a part of that process. She wants to understand what he's thinking, the things he's factoring in. She really wants to understand how he's feeling about it too, and how the emotions and the relationships filter in to the subject at hand or the problem at hand, which for him, there may not be a lot of that because he may be exclusively or more directly focused on the right amygdala and problem solving externally and not factoring in what the left amygdala would bring to the table, and so that's why a lot of times when men and women are able to come together like a husband and wife and they're able to collaborate, they are each bringing unique strengths and perspectives, approaches, ways of processing information, and they can often come to a better solution and a better way of doing things when they're both valued and honored with how they speak and how they process information. And they're coming with that mentality of partnership and unity and trying to be a team. It's when instead we feel threatened by our partner's way of doing things. So if instead I'm insulted, I'm hurt, I'm threatened by the fact that my husband's internally processing first, or my husband is annoyed, overwhelmed, bothered by the fact that I'm talking so much and I'm not getting to the point, or I'm offended when he's trying to solve it when I don't need him to solve it, or it's not time to solve it. Right. This is a common point of conflict within marriage. And so what I'm encouraging all of you to do is to take this information and do a paradigm shift, kind of reframing this. And, women, be mindful of the way that your husband processes information and how the way that you're approaching him could be affecting him and vice versa. Husbands, understand the way that she processes and why she's wanting you to verbalize more, why she's wanting you to describe things, share emotions, and factor in the relational impact of these choices or decisions or just problem solving. Okay. So she is wanting to feel connected. She's wanting to understand the details. She's trying to put things into words to fully process her experience. And when husbands withhold that, it starts to erode the sense of trust that she may have. But on the other side, if she's not mindful of how overwhelming her words can be, then she could be shutting him down, even though that's not his intention. It could be something that's happening unconsciously. So I want you to take this information and allow it to be an explanation that informs your interactions. I don't want you to take this information and allow it to be an excuse for continuing to operate in ways that do not serve you or your marriage. So explanation, not excuse. We take this information to help us understand more deeply and therefore know how to come together and collaborate better, communicate better, how to be a better team and partners. Okay, so I'm going to keep adding to this because it's not all just about the amygdala. There's another part of the brain that factors into relational dynamics as well. It's called the inferior parietal lobule. I'm going to shorten it to IPL. Again, everybody has two of them. It's on the outside of the brain. So you have one on the left hemisphere and one on the right hemisphere. Men have a larger one on the left. And again, that leftward asymmetry. And women, just like with the amygdala, they're going to mirror them. They're going to have a larger one on the right and rightward asymmetry. So I want you to think about how, again, that mirroring and how that factors into the way you relate to each other, but also into the way that God designed marriage to be. So what the IPL does is it enables men to be more big picture in their thinking. And this is what is behind the stereotypes of, stereotypical jobs, engineering, construction, being in the military, stereotypical hobbies, cars, boats, bikes, video games, sporting events, building things, creating things. Okay. This is also why men often are not great at multitasking. So put that on the spectrum. Some men really not good at multitasking, really not good at details, right? Instead, they tend to excel when they can focus on something and they can give their whole attention to something. Whereas other men may be able to multitask a little bit better. They may be able to, kind of juggle a few more things. Some men, especially with this, are able to switch topics quicker than other men, or to switch gears, kind of come out of, okay, I'm over here in work mode. Now it's talk to the wife mode or help the kids mode or whatever it may be. So again, just understanding it's on a spectrum and just considering how this information applies to you in your marriage. So the purpose for the men having a larger left inferior parietal lobule, IPL, is to be those big picture thinkers, because it allows them to focus on the horizon. So go back to being the hunters and the warriors. They need to have their eyes up on the horizon, scanning, doing that situational awareness, that situational analysis, to know where the threats or the opportunities are. So that's why the left IPL and the right amygdala work together. It also, like I said, allows him to focus. So having a larger left IPL means that he can focus on a single task and do it extremely well. This enables him to be better at protecting his wife and family and providing for his wife and family, because he's able to take in this information, process it quickly, make a decision, focus on what needs to be done, and get it done. He's able to devote all his resources to whatever the task is at hand. This big picture single task focusing ability is due to that larger left IPL and that asymmetry, that preference for it. And it is responsible for visual spatial processing. Specifically, the left IPL is involved in perceiving three-dimensional figures. It's involved in judging speed and distance. It's involved in estimating time. And also it's involved in planning complex motor functions. So again, think about how those specific abilities factor into things like hunting, or factor into battle strategy, or factor into safety and protection, right? And this is something that serves the family well, and it allows the husband to excel in his role. So it's something, again, to honor, to respect, and as much as possible, take advantage of it, right? So it's looking for those places where, and I'll even say it to my husband, I need your boy brain. Okay, I need you to bring your boy brain over here, because there's something here that involves a three-dimensional object, or judging speed, or judging distance, or judging time, or trying to understand this complex motor function. I'm not quite grasping how something's working, or maybe I'm struggling to identify the full process, because I have a left IPL too, right? I just don't use it as much. It's not as strong. I'm not as accustomed to it. Okay, this is also why men tend to dominate the STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and math. It's because of this. So it's interesting to see all these efforts to push girls into those fields without considering the fact that they may be operating with a disadvantage. At least a lot of the girls will be. So are there women who can do these fields, who can excel? Yes. And I bet you anything, if we put them under a functional MRI, they would have a larger left IPL than the other women. Okay, so again, it's recognizing women do have it, they can use it, but it's like almost being right-handed and trying to write with your left hand. You can do it, it's just awkward and complicated, versus if you're left-handed, it comes more naturally and you're able to do it. Same sort of thing, okay? So as I said, women mirror it. So women have a larger right IPL, and they also have that preference for it. The right IPL judges emotions, relationship dynamics, and social cues. And it results in a strong focus on details and a strong focus on subtleties. And this is why women are notorious for using a lot of nonverbal communication, a lot of paraverbal communication, and when they're talking and when they're communicating with each other. That's why they may roll their eyes and yet say they're fine, and then they get mad when their husband takes them at their word rather than picking up on the fact they rolled their eyes. Okay, but it's also vice versa, why she will pester you and keep asking you if something's wrong because you sighed a little too heavily, because she's reading into those subtleties and she's reading into those cues, right? Or you may say something a certain way and she's like, what do you mean by that? right? And you're confused going, I just what I said. Well, it's how you said it. Why'd you have that tone? Or why'd you emphasize this word? Or why'd you put an edge on it? Or why'd you raise your voice or whatever it may be? There's a subtlety, there's a detail she's picking up on and factoring into her perception and interpretation of whatever you're communicating to her. So a lot of times I have to tell women, you got to turn that sensitivity dial down a little bit because men do not communicate with such an emphasis on the paraverbal and the nonverbal. They don't rely on those subtleties as much as women do. And so you may need to chill out a little bit on how sensitive you are to reading into those more subtle cues and realize that while if a woman had said it that way, if a woman had done that while she was communicating, it very well could mean what you're interpreting it to mean, but that's not necessarily applicable to your husband. You have to learn how he communicates and you have to honor the way he communicates and not get stuck into some cycle of perception, interpretation, and then just projecting it onto him. Okay. And at the same time, when you're communicating with him, you really need to learn how to be more expressive and more explicit in what you're saying, because women will imply a lot when they communicate, right? So if there's something, so say the trash needs to get taken out and I'm, making dinner and I pull the trash out and it's full and my husband's walking by and I say, hey, honey, the trash is full. Okay. Now, did I technically ask him to take out the trash? No, it was implied. Now, most of the time he'll pick up on that implication. But if he's walking by because he's focused on going and doing something, he may not catch that. He may be like, okay, she said something about the trash, but he's focused on whatever his task at hand. Or maybe he's internally processing something, same thing. Hey, he heard me say something. He might have even acknowledged the trash, but he's not picking up on what I'm implying. Versus if I were to say, hey, honey, the trash is full. When you get a chance, can you take it out? That then is more expressive, right? Or even better, if when he's walking by, I would say, hey, honey, wait for him to stop and look at me and then say, the trash is full. Can you take it out? Because then by waiting for him to stop and give me his attention, right, I'm more likely to communicate effectively to him. Whereas if he doesn't stop, he doesn't turn his eyes toward me and he's still walking, I'm now frustrated because I'm going to assume, like the good multitasker that I am, that regardless of what he's doing, he should be able to take this new input on the fly and factor it in. Not necessarily. Okay. So I want you to reflect on those times where maybe you've had a disagreement, an argument, maybe you've just been bothered or hurt, maybe something's upset you, and see how this information factors in and how just minor changes and adjustments can go a long way in just helping you communicate better and avoid that unnecessary conflict and misunderstanding. Okay. The purpose for the woman being more detail oriented is that as men are watching the big picture, as their eyes up are on the horizon, as the hunters and the warriors, like I said before, women are together, women have their eyes down, they're focusing on the details, whether they're, foraging for something, whether they're watching the children, whether they're taking care of the food, whatever it may be, right? Their eyes are down and they're taking in a lot of information. And, especially what if she's doing all those things, like what if she's got multiple children running around having different needs while she's trying to cook dinner, while she's trying, and there's a lot of details and she has to be able to multitask and take these details in. And then if you put them together, well, women spend a lot of time working together. So being able to work as a team, communicate efficiently, be able to communicate quickly, not necessarily, having to elaborate or articulate everything, that benefits them, that behooves them in the way that they interact with each other. So again, this is a strength in the right context, in the right circumstances, but it can also prove to be either a weakness or an impediment in other situations. So we need to make sure that we realize our own tendencies and how it either benefits us or creates problems for us, depending upon the situation and depending upon the person that we're talking with. And that advice applies to the men just as much, that you need to understand what your tendencies are. But again, It may work really well when you're coordinating with other men, or it may work really well when you're at work, but when you're at home, not so much. So women rely a lot on all levels of communication, body language, facial expressions, that vocal intonation, word choices, word, emphasis on certain words, and touch. So again, just learning to add words to that too. But for the men, learn to pay attention to that when you can. You don't dismiss it, don't overlook it, because that is going to be something she's intentionally incorporating into her interactions with you, because that's yet more communication. And I don't want you to miss it, right? So that's something to factor in as well. Okay, back to the men. Another part of the brain that we need to factor in to understand relational dynamics, gender differences in relational dynamics, is something called the cingulate gyrus. Okay. This part of the brain, factored into the right amygdala and the left IPL, is why men tend to be more logical, and they tend to be more task oriented, and they tend to be more problem solvers. They tend to really value logic even over emotion, for this reason. The emotional center of the brain, this anterior cingulate gyrus, okay, it's an interesting part because it kind of sits right over the emotional center. Now, when it is either kind of more dormant, not necessarily as active, then emotions are present. So the man's going to be more aware, and that he has feelings about whatever's happening. He may be able to express that, all of those sorts of things. But what's interesting about this particular part of the brain for men is that it is reciprocally inhibited by the right amygdala. What do I mean by that? Reciprocally means back and forth, right? And inhibited means that something is suppressed. So the right amygdala, remember, is that part of the brain that's scanning the environment, looking for threats, signaling for more testosterone when there is a threat in order to go into battle mode. Okay. So when the right amygdala is activated on high alert, it is reciprocally inhibiting the emotional center of the brain. Okay. So that means when there's a threat, his emotions will get suppressed. It's not permanent, but it will get suppressed. And that's designed to help men be better warriors. It's designed to help them be the hunters. Okay. So that's what this is. It's allowing them to almost kind of temporarily detach from their emotions, temporarily suppress their emotions, so that they can focus on the task at hand, that they can fight, that they can strategize, that they can defend themselves and their families, or if they're hunting, that they're able to be strategic in taking the life of an animal, right? So it's how do we do all that without having the entanglements that can come from being emotionally, super emotional, okay? And that's what this is. Okay. Now, the problem is that the man's brain does not apply this ability or utilize this ability solely in the context of hunting and fighting. Okay. It can happen whenever he perceives a threat. And that can include an angry wife yelling at him. So a lot of times I have worked with couples, and I've had to advise the woman to realize that the very thing she's trying to get, right? She's raising her voice, she's expressing herself more emotionally, she has this agitation, right? Whatever way, she may be crying, she may be, using, a lot of gestures, whatever it is, right? His brain, the right amygdala, is looking at that going, oh no, this is a problem, this is a threat, this is an issue. And what's happening is what she's trying to do is get him to engage, right? Get him to talk, get him to emote. She's trying to get him, right, to respond. But what she doesn't realize she's doing is, by going about it in this way, she's activating that right amygdala, which is suppressing the emotions. So the best that she may get from him is anger, right? Because that anger helps fuel battle or fuel, a fighting mode, right? So what she's doing is she's trying to get him to engage emotionally, engage relationally. And what she's doing is actually activating all the things that put him more into the mode of fight. Okay. So we don't want to do that. So we need to be aware of how we are coming across and how that might be working against us, right? We're kind of shooting our own selves in the foot by doing it this way. Now, the tolerance that a particular man has is going to vary. And so that's the homework that I have for the man in the situation. You need to work on building your tolerance. So just like she needs to turn her sensitivity dial on interpreting, reading into things, you need to learn to turn your sensitivity dial to her emotional expressiveness. You need to learn how to tolerate when she is expressing herself, expressing her emotions, when she is upset, and don't just automatically shut down. Don't automatically guard up, wall up. Don't automatically go into battle mode and fight mode. And so that's going to take some training of the brain. It's going to take you helping your brain to interpret what she's doing differently so that it's not automatically perceived and responded to as if it's a threat. Okay. So on the other side, women, that limbic system that the anterior cingulate gyrus sits over, women have a larger limbic system. That's the emotional network of the brain. And because they have a larger limbic system, as well as that right IPL, as well as that left amygdala, all these things working together, that means they tend to be more in touch with their emotions. They tend to be more expressive and communicative about their feelings. They tend to be more empathetic in how they relate and talk with other people. And it gives them a larger emotional vocabulary. It's interesting because, I've heard the stereotype that women use twice as many words as a man does in a given day, but I couldn't find any true research to back up that claim. Instead, what the research bore out is that women have a larger emotional vocabulary, but also that they are better at recalling and utilizing emotional words when time is constrained. Well, when is time constrained? Well, when someone's yelling at you and demanding an answer right away, right? So again, if we look at this dynamic between a husband and wife, if she is demanding that he tells her how he's feeling, well, now all of a sudden you got the right amygdala activating, shutting down the emotional center, which makes it harder for him to even recognize it, let alone put it to words. But then on top of it, there's this feature where he has a smaller emotional vocabulary, but also when you constrain it, when you put pressure on it, he's going to have a harder time recalling those words. Okay. And I think that it applies to going into battle mode, because when you're in battle mode, you don't necessarily need a lot of words or emotional words. You need more logic, right? Okay. So again, if a woman wants her husband to talk to her more about how he's feeling, she needs to back off. Don't put a time limit on it. Don't pressure him. Give him the space to be able to reflect and assess his internal emotional state, and then also figure out the right words for it. When I first became a counselor a couple of decades ago, my initial clients were middle school boys, and I was in Los Angeles at the time. So middle school inner city boys. And I remember trying to talk to them about their life, their challenges, their struggles. And every single one of them, when I would ask them how they feel about something, I feel good or I feel bad. That was it. Now, they were able to identify anger, and they were able to identify maybe fear and maybe happiness, but that was kind of it. So one of the things I started with was giving them a larger emotional vocabulary. I found ways through playing games with them to teach them more words, and to also teach them the subtleties and the nuance and the difference. What's the difference between being angry and being frustrated, right? Or being angry and being annoyed, right? What's the difference? There is a difference, right? And if you can tell me you're angry versus I'm frustrated, okay, well, what's frustrating you? because frustration means that something or someone is preventing you from getting or doing what you want. So that means there's an obstacle. Frustration is the response we have to an obstacle versus anger. Any number of things can trigger anger, right? But anger typically is masking. It's the secondary emotion that underneath is either like a sense of fear, like a threat or fear, or hurt or a feeling of loss. Well, frustration's different than that, even though it may trigger a sense of potential loss or real loss, depending upon what the obstacle is and what is preventing you from doing, right? So frustration can turn into anger, but even then, it's going to be two different things. Frustration is, let's talk about the obstacle that's in your way. Let's talk about what you want. And then if it is then turning into anger, let's talk about the loss, or let's talk about the threat of loss. That then is going to resolve anger. Those are two different things. Okay. So for me to be able to help these boys to problem solve, but also to improve their communication, their conflict resolution, and really to that anger management, they had to understand what their anger was, but they also had to understand that there's other emotions and not everything has to all be funneled into anger. Because if we can recognize, hey, that's annoying me, well, then I can respond to the annoyance, or that's frustrating me. Well, now I can respond to the obstacle. Okay. But when it comes to women, that's why, women tend to use a lot more emotional language. That's why they tend to be quicker on the draw when it comes to those emotional words versus men. So why? Why did God make women so emotional? Well, it's because they're the heart and the glue of the family. They're the caretakers. They're the nurturers. They're the ones who protect the heart of the family, the heart of the relationship, right? As he's protecting her, she's protecting that which he loves the most. Okay. She's tending to that. So she needs to be the one that cares. She needs to be the one that notices. She needs to be the barometer, right, of the state of the family and the state of the marriage. So that's her role and it needs to be appreciated, but so does his. So it's about finding that balance and appreciating and honoring both, not diminishing or dismissing either the way that the man is or the way that the woman is, instead looking at the strengths and bringing them together. Another thing I want to share is something called oxytocin. Oxytocin, it's a neuropeptide, but you can kind of picture it like a hormone. It kind of acts like a hormone. And women have, so what does oxytocin do? Okay, so it is the hormone that is involved in bonding, mate choice, and emotional attachment. Okay, so it is what allows women to form bonds and deep emotional attachments to people, to objects, and to places. Okay, now here's the interesting thing about oxytocin is women have more of it. Okay, so it's not that men don't emotionally bond, they just tend to not bond with as many people, or they tend to not bond as fast, or they tend to not bond as deep. Okay. And that's because they have less oxytocin. But here's the other interesting thing. The effects of oxytocin are enhanced in the presence of estrogen, and women have more estrogen. It's diminished in the presence of testosterone. Men have more testosterone. Okay. So why is that? We'll go back. When women are left in the camp, left at home, working with other women or working with their children, right? That estrogen contributes to that, and she needs to care. She needs to be emotionally invested. This is why, if you think about it, it blows our minds. It is completely unnatural for us to think about women who harm their own children or abandon their own children or neglect their own children. That is more mind-blowing, sadly, than it is for a man to do it. We still don't like when men do it. We still are against men doing it. But if you think about it, if you hear that a man abandoned his children versus a woman abandoned her children, like instinctually, we look at the woman and go, huh? Like, we don't like either. We're not happy with either. We don't support either, but it feels just a little more unnatural. for a woman to do it. And it's because of this. It's because she's supposed to be the nurturer. She's supposed to be the caretaker. She's supposed to have these deep, abiding emotional bonds. She's supposed to have all this oxytocin flowing through her, making her feel connected to her children. Okay. So that's why we kind of have that natural, tendency. But for men, why is it diminished in the presence of testosterone? Where again, what are the situations in which testosterone is signaled for? It's when the right amygdala says there's a threat. So he cannot be emotionally bonding to the deer that he's about to shoot. He cannot be emotionally attaching and bonding with the enemy that's coming to shoot him. So that testosterone is going to shut that oxytocin down so that he can respond the way he needs to respond. So go back then to him perceiving things in the relationship and something his wife's doing as a threat. That keeps him from feeling emotionally connected and bonded. So when that right amygdala goes up, the emotional center is suppressed. He's guarding up or getting angry. And this is also then inhibiting his oxytocin. And if we do it enough or long enough, then his sense of attachment and closeness is going to be impaired. Okay. So oxytocin is released when there's physical touch. So that's why affection and closeness is important. You get a mega dose of it during sex and specifically during orgasm. So that's why a lot of times with men, they feel emotionally close when they are intimate with their wives, because that's one of the times they get a mega dose of oxytocin. They don't necessarily get that same level of oxytocin released at other times or in other ways, whereas women do. So again, women have more, women have less. And that's where closeness, touch, affection, and sex is so important to the connection between a husband and wife. Again, though, explanation, not excuse. If there is a reason why sexual intimacy is not possible, or is not possible with the frequency, that maybe it once was, maybe there's a health issue, maybe she just had a baby, maybe, there's things going on, that doesn't give an excuse. Okay. But hopefully it gives an explanation for why he might be feeling lonely or neglected or detached, right? Why he might be struggling to be more emotionally connected and expressive. It's not something he's necessarily doing on purpose. It's just the fact that it's been a while since he had an influx of oxytocin. Okay, so just looking at these things again that factor in, that may help to explain some of these relational dynamics. But all this information also supports what we know to be typically the primary emotional needs for men and women. So for women, their primary emotional need is love and security. Now, she needs to feel loved, but she also needs to feel secure. And that security can mean a number of things. This is where, again, we factor in the individual. She may have a stronger need for physical security or emotional security, relational security, maybe spiritual security. Okay. The way that she feels loved. Well, what does that look like? This may be a good place to go and explore the idea of love languages. What is her love language? Or what are the things that make her feel more loved and seen? Okay. So the reason why she's going to seek things like reassurance, affection, right? And non-sexual touches, affection. Okay. Because if it's all sexual, she's going to start to feel like an object rather than a partner and someone who's cherished. Okay. So she needs non-sexual touches. She needs time together. She needs conversations, discussions. She needs you to talk. She needs you to also give her a place to talk and vent and listen, right? She's going to look for expressions of love and devotion. Women are going to be different in what that looks like. Some women love flowers. Some women go, why'd you get me flowers? They just die. Like I'd rather get chocolate. I don't know, or maybe her expressions of love and devotion are, words or service, whatever it may be. But this is also why women tend to celebrate those meaningful moments in her life and in your relationship. That's why she still holds on to the concert tickets from the first concert you went to, or why she has various anniversaries and not just your wedding anniversary, right? Basically what it boils down to is she's looking to make sure that she's still the one. because life for a woman is like a junior high school dance. She's waiting to be picked. And it's not enough to pick her once, or it's not enough to pick her twice, saying, I picked you when I asked you out. I picked you when I married you. I'll let you know if anything changes. Sadly, I've had a lot of men have that attitude, and I've had a handful actually say it out loud. That's not enough. She needs to feel picked regularly. She needs that reassurance. She needs to feel love. That's the emotional oxygen that keeps her side of this relationship, this union, healthy. And so be mindful of that and take care of that. Now, one more thing I'm going to say about the brain, how it relates to this within the wife. The feeling of being loved, it activates a part of the brain called the ventral tegmental area. Okay. It's that yellow dot that's on the screen. Okay. And you can see that it sits right underneath the limbic system, right at the top of the spine. And the spine, right, is what signals, sends those chemicals and those signals down. And that's what we interpret and call emotions. Okay. Emotions actually are physiological. So that's why that limbic system, that emotional center, then goes straight into the spine and the nervous system. That's how we feel excited or sad or scared or whatever it may be. Okay. This is also how she feels loved. Now, factor in that the part of the brain, so that the VTA, which is that little dot, it also creates neurons whose primary neurotransmitter is dopamine. Dopamine is that feel good, happy, that's what we love. Dopamine hits. Okay. So that's what we seek when we're happy, when we're excited, when something is fulfilling and satisfying, when something is meaningful. So the VTA creates those neurons whose primary neurotransmitter is dopamine, and it's responsible for activating the caudate nucleus. And you can see the caudate nucleus there on the left. That is the connection between the frontal lobe, the thinking part of the brain, and the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain. Caudate nucleus sits right there. It is the mitigator. It is the mediator between thoughts and feelings. And it floats right there in between. Okay. The VTA activates it. The VTA also activates the corpus callosum, which is that primary part of the limbic system. Well, the corpus callosum and this caudate nucleus, they're filled with dopamine neurons. Okay. So that means that the VTA creates the dopamine neurons. This caudate nucleus is filled with dopamine neurons, and also the VTA activates the caudate nucleus filled with the dopamine neurons. Why am I saying all this? It's because estrogen makes women more sensitive to the rewarding effects of dopamine. So women have more, just like oxytocin, women have more of it, and estrogen makes them more sensitive to it. So that pathway that connects to the VTA, okay, that gets activated when she feels loved. And when she feels loved, it gives her dopamine hits. Okay. So, but this is also why women are the primary consumers, targets of romantic movies, romantic books, Hallmark, right? It's why Valentine's Day was created, right? It's if you look at these things, it's why the whole wedding industry is the way that it is. All these things, it's about making her feel loved, because why? When you make her feel loved, or when you have her think about love, when you have her seeing expressions of love, all of that is dopamine hits. It basically, almost turns women into love addicts, right? And so when we see that, right, that helps us to understand, why this is such a strong emotional need for women. What we want is the husband to be the primary source of meeting this need. We don't want her going and, getting addicted to romantic books, romantic movies. We don't want her going and focusing and fixating on her children and trying to get her love needs met through her children. That's not good for the parent or the child. We also don't want running the risk of emotional affairs, which women can have, yes, with men, but also women can have emotional affairs with other people too. It doesn't always become sexual, but it's about having this need met somewhere outside of the primary source, which should be the husband. And so look at that and say, where does this show up in our relationship? And I'm praying that it's a non-issue, because in your relationship, that emotional need is satisfied really well in her. The husband's already doing a great job, and this information is confirming and validating. And that's my prayer. But for most couples, we get a little lazy. We put the relationship on cruise control, or not just lazy, it could also just be circumstances, right? It's like life has you busy and distracted, and I just don't have the time for that, and I'm taking care of all these other things. And it's just like, it's the same excuses we use to ignore and neglect our relationship with the Lord too. So just like we suffer when we allow these things to get in the way of our time with the Lord and our connection to the Lord, our marriage is going to suffer when we allow those sorts of things to also cause us to neglect meeting these emotional needs and having and reinforcing this connection within the marriage. All right. So if women need love and security, what do men need? Men need respect and encouragement. What men need most is that the people or the person, maybe it's just the wife, the one whom he protects and provides for, the one for whom he sacrifices, he needs that to be respected. He needs that to be supported. He needs that to be encouraged. Now, what does that look like? Well, just like I said with the 5 love languages, that might be relevant here. Or, maybe the man needs to spend some time reflecting on what is it that she does that satisfies this need? What is it that maybe she once did and stopped doing, and you feel the loss of that? Maybe, so it's just kind of exploring, because for some men, they just want the acknowledgement, right? And this isn't about sarcastically being like, okay, I'm supposed to give him an applause every time he takes out the trash. No. Okay. That's not what we're talking about. But if you can periodically acknowledge and just say, hey, I just want you to know, I noticed that you did the dishes, or you know what? I appreciate that every morning you get up before everybody else, or that, you work so hard and yet you still come home and help with the kids. Like, it's just noticing, acknowledging. Okay. Now it could also mean support. Maybe he needs you to come alongside him and help him to do something. So basically what this emotional need for men boils down to is that if men are to work and achieve, protect and provide, then he'll be much more successful with a wife that supports him, helps him, encourages him, admires him, just overall respects him and what he does, honors his contributions, and honor who he is and how he is. He'll better fulfill his role when his emotional tank is full. And our culture has become so focused on women and women's needs that we become neglectful of men's needs, or we just boil it down to they just need sex. And that's not it at all. So I just want to encourage you as a couple to really start to reflect on this information and how it gets experienced and expressed for you as individuals, and then for you as a couple, so that both of you can feel fulfilled, seen, valued, and respected, but also the strengths and the contributions that you each bring to the table are honored and incorporated into your dynamic, so that your marriage and your family can be as strong as possible. And it's also honoring the way that God made you and the way that God is bringing you as a couple together uniquely and specifically. So don't neglect, don't downplay these emotional needs. Yes, women need love and security, and men need respect and encouragement. So how does this all come together? Well, let's kind of do a side-by-side of everything that I just laid out for you. So if because of that testosterone and that right amygdala and the calling to be the protector and provider, he's more competitive, well, she is the counterpart. She is more cooperative. She is the one who's the nurturer, the caretaker, the one who's taking care of the details, taking care of, everything, where she can keep her eyes down and be more detail oriented, where he can keep his eyes up and focus on the big picture, keep his eyes on the horizon. And he can use those skills that he has, those innate abilities to judge speed, time, and distance, which is that external focus coming from the right amygdala and the left IPL, where she can judge emotions, emotional state, relational well-beings, relational cues, because her brain is working in a mirrored and complementary fashion. He tends to be more logical, especially the more that the situation warrants a threat or a need to act, a problem to solve. She tends to, like I said, filter in the emotional, the relational into situations, into considering that aspect of problems or issues or circumstances. And so, where he's bringing the logical viewpoint, she's going to counterbalance with that more emotional viewpoint. And again, it's interesting too that while each individual is on a spectrum based upon their gender, I often find that they still mirror each other. And when it comes to a husband and wife and how they come together. So he's called to be the protector and the provider, and her primary emotional need is love and security. She's called to support and help, where his primary emotional need is going to be respect and encouragement. So all of these things are part of the divine design, this, wonderful system that God created for men and women to come together as a husband and a wife, a unique pairing where the two become one with a portion of his spirit as the glue that binds them. And they are to take these, innate gender specific qualities as well as everything else that's unique about them, personality, background, upbringing, talents, gifts, all of those things, and come together to make a unique whole that is as strong as possible and as God honoring as possible. So both men and women can have any of the communication styles. So if you've not yet watched the video on love and communication, there's a correspondence there as well. So a lot of this, feeds off of that. What is unique about communication, but specific to, these gender qualities. For example, if you can look at a man, how would it appear that a man is turning toward in his communication style versus how would it appear if a woman is turning toward in her communication style? What would it look like for a man to be turning away versus what would it look like for a woman to be turning away? And also, you can get more specific. What does it look like for you as the man in this marriage to turn toward? And what does it look like for you as the woman, the wife in this marriage to turn toward? Learning each other specifically and uniquely as well. One example of that turning toward is another kind of gender specific experience. Oftentimes, women prefer to connect and communicate face to face, whereas men tend to prefer to connect and communicate shoulder to shoulder. So it's not uncommon for when women kind of have that girls' night that they are doing something where they are face to face interacting and they're able to take in all of the different methods of communication, right? They're able to see the body language, the facial expressions, the gestures. They're able to pick up on the nuance of tone and pacing and intonation and all those different things. Whereas men, they tend to connect while doing something. So they may go out and they may go fishing, or they may go watch a sporting event, or they may go for a drive, or they may go and play a game, maybe shoot pool or do whatever it is that it's more activity based. And there is talking that takes place. It just may not be constant talking, but they're going to rely a lot more on the verbal qualities and verbal content, as well as, the context that comes from the situation that they're in, and allowing that to be a point of bonding and connecting through doing. So if this is, example is true for you, then that's going to have to be taken into consideration so that both of you have your needs met. When you have a date night, find something where for part of the time you're doing something to satisfy his needs, and part of the time you're face to face and engaging that way to satisfy her needs, right? Or you may alternate. There may be a time where you guys just go for a drive, or you go and do an activity where there's not a whole lot of deep, meaningful, emotional talking. And then there's another time where there is, where you go out to dinner, you go have coffee, something like that. I know, and I said that a lot of this information is applicable to other relationships. I'm the mother of boys, and I found that if I were to sit down and have them face me and try to have a meaningful talk, it was never as successful as if I tried talking to them while we were in the car. or that side of thing, like going and doing something with them, go for a walk, go for a drive, and just respecting that about them. And rather than forcing them to go all the way into my preferred style or come all the way to what I like to do and how I would prefer to communicate, it's about respecting that and either alternating that reciprocity that's so essential to strong, healthy relationships, or it's about meeting in the middle and learning how to cooperate and respect each other and incorporate what you both need into the relational dynamic. So go back to the communication lesson, that you also have the components of communication. Every single communication, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, whether it's written, whether it's physical, whatever it is, it has content, it has feeling, and it has mandate. And then as far as methods of communicating, there's verbal, there's paraverbal, there's nonverbal. Men and women have the same pieces, they have the same components, they have the same methods available to them, but again, they will use them differently. So women may emphasize or rely on the feeling more than men do. They may be more expressive paraverbally and nonverbally than men are. They may be more covert in their mandate. They may imply things a lot more than men do. It's one of those things I'll hear men sometimes say, why do women have to be so complicated? Why can't they just say what they're thinking? Why they can't just be obvious or direct or to the point, And it's a difference. It's not one is good, one's bad. It really just depends on the situation and the setting. And we need to learn to respect that and to see the strength in both approaches, as well as the potential pitfalls or weaknesses. And we need to inventory those realities so that in certain situations or at given times or with specific issues or problems, we may incorporate more of the woman's way of doing it or the man's way of doing it, or we may incorporate both and find something balanced. So that's what I'm hoping that you're taking away from this, is to see that one isn't better than the other, that God created both men and women on purpose, and he made them different on purpose for a purpose. Okay. And that different doesn't mean wrong. It just means different. And there's both strengths and opportunities, as well as potential weaknesses and threats in all these different things. So we need to instead have a mindset of partnership, of teamwork, of coming together to complement each other and to become that one unit, right? That is both, focused on the Lord and also, honoring and respecting these differences. So another example specific to this, like I said, women will use more emotional language, whereas men may use more logical language. And so it's a matter of listening past that and not taking, that as offense. Not if the woman's wanting to have a more emotional conversation, he's being logical, not allowing that to be completely offensive and hurtful. Maybe expressing, I hear what you're saying, I appreciate the logic of it, but I need you to also consider the emotion of it, right? Or vice versa, that the man's trying to have a very logical conversation, or maybe he's trying to problem solve and she's being, or at least appears to be, emotional or irrational about it. Look at why, and maybe even explore that. Like, I know we're trying to solve this problem and I'm coming at it, super logically, but you seem to be having an emotional reaction to this, or you seem to maybe be seeing something I'm not seeing that's causing you to feel a certain kind of way. Like, can you explain that? Can you help me to catch up to whatever it is that you're seeing, right? And it's just a matter of being respectful, in that interaction and in that exchange. Okay. And as I've already said, women use a lot more paraverbal and nonverbal than men do. So while this may be confusing, why did God create us so different? It's important to understand how it all works. Okay. It's supposed to be an ongoing interaction. It's not supposed to be linear. It's supposed to be cyclical. It's supposed to be ongoing, right? And so if we take all of this together, right, and going back to the idea of intimacy is connection. Okay. So when we're talking about having, intimacy, having connection, okay, we want to be connected on all four levels. And this is, again, something I covered in the love and communication lesson. There's mental intimacy, emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy, and physical intimacy. And women tend to be more focused on the internal because of that left amygdala, right IPL dynamic, as well as the oxytocin, as well as that, the dopamine. Okay. So when she feels a strong internal connection, when she's feeling loved and desired and accepted and wanted, she's feeling secure, that's going to motivate her, make her more open to making an external connection. Whereas since the man is more going to be mindful of visual input, of external experience, of watching for those kinds of cues because of that right amygdala left IPL dynamic that's taking place, then he's looking to make that external connection. He's looking for external evidence, tangible as evidence, physical points of connection. And when he gets that, then that's going to motivate him to be more open to making an internal connection, because it's in that space. Remember that you have the right IPL and the emotional center of the brain reciprocally inhibiting each other. And so when he's in a place where he can let his guard down, where there isn't a threat, where in fact it's the opposite, this is a safe place, then he's able to open up more emotionally and make that internal connection. And it's meant to be something that is continuing to feed into each other. She feels a strong internal connection, which motivates her to make an external connection. When he feels that strong external connection, he's motivated to make an internal connection. So that's the idea, is it's supposed to be, again, an ongoing dynamic between a husband and a wife. So we have the mental intimacy, the emotional intimacy, and the spiritual intimacy on the internal side, the physical intimacy on the external side. And as I said, that left amygdala, right IPL, as well as the larger limbic system, more oxytocin, more dopamine, right? They love love. That's going to be on that side. Whereas his right amygdala, left IPL, lower oxytocin, higher testosterone, that's going to drive that more external focus on the connection. Now, how does it fall apart? It's when something disrupts this cycle and we're not able to get it back on track. And instead we start spinning in the opposite way. We start to disconnect and we start we're now failing to meet each other's emotional needs. She feels a weak internal connection, right? That makes her more defensive. So she's less motivated to make an external connection. And if he's feeling a weak external connection, again, makes him feel defensive. Go back to that threat thing that I was talking about a moment ago. So therefore, he's less motivated to make an internal connection. And if we continue to spiral this way, then we will find ourselves withholding more and more of what the other person needs from us. But I want to remind you that we are called to the purpose of our role in marriage, and it is not contingent upon the other person. So I cannot withhold my role and my contributions to the marriage as the wife, almost like, you remember those kids on the playground that really wanted to be invited into the game, and instead of doing anything that would reach out and try to make a connection and get him invited and included in, instead he grabs the ball and holds it over his head and almost tries to bully his way into the game. We don't want to do that. It would be wrong, and it would be unchristlike for me to withhold that respect and that encouragement from my husband, as a way to try to motivate him to give me love and security. And when I verbalize it like that, it makes sense that it wouldn't work, but somehow inside of ourselves, it seems like it would. Okay. So just being mindful that we need to both be paying attention to the other person's needs. And in fact, that's what the word submission means, is to voluntarily give and place the needs and wants of the other underneath your own. It's to elevate your spouse's needs and to put them before yourself. And so that's where that agape love, that sacrificial love, that no matter what, unconditional, giving what the other person needs, not even what they necessarily deserve in a particular moment. It's what they need. It's what you're called to. It's what you're commanded to, when it comes to a Christ-centered, godly marriage. And so looking for those ways to continue to, reach out, make connection on all the four levels, to continue to build a strong internal connection and external connection to meet each other's emotional needs.
Now, sometimes it's not something either of you have done, but it's just circumstances that have gotten in the way. And like I said, illness, injury, travel, work, kids, family. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why there can be a period of disconnect. But scripture warns us that we need to come back together. We need to continue to feed that connection and maintain that connection. Otherwise, we're at spiritual risk, not just relational risk. Okay. So this is for our own spiritual well-being, not just the marriage well-being. So we need to be mindful that we should not be enduring or accepting, disconnection, but we do what we can, right? Paul says, as much as up to you, right? We need to be at peace. We need to be hospitable. We need to be kind, to each other and to others. And so I just want to encourage you that if you are in a space where the cycle is gone haywire, it's going the wrong way, look for opportunities to start to right that. And whatever you can do to contribute to meeting your spouse's needs and knowing that when you fill their tank, that's going to help them feel like they have what they need to now be reciprocating and give that back to you. Another thing to factor in, and this comes from John Gottman's research again, is he, based off of the things that he has studied, watching couples in his marriage lab up at the University of Washington, is he came to the point where he could predict divorce with like a 92, 93% accuracy. And what he looked for was 4 qualities that he dubbed the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse of marriage, right? So kind of borrowing that terminology from the book of Revelation. But for marriage specifically, it's these 4 things. The first one that comes on the scene is defensiveness. And that's where we need to be careful. If you start to get defensive, look and see, again, referencing the love and communication lesson, are you holding on to a fence? Are you holding on to those quote unquote rocks? Are you doing anything that rather than forgiving, rather than seeking reconciliation, instead you're on the defense, you're walling up, you're pulling back, because that is definitely at least a yellow flag. Criticism. Okay. So criticism is where we are nitpicking, nagging, we're fault finding. But a lot of times we're doing so in a way where it comes across judgmental and condemning and rejecting. It can include things that sound like you're attacking someone's character or intelligence or abilities. And that is very much a red flag. The other one that comes soon after or in correspondence with it would be stonewalling. And stonewalling is where you become like a stone wall. Nothing in, nothing out. You shut down, you guard up, you wall up, whatever it may be as far as the manifestation. But the idea is that you're not connecting, you're holding back. And a lot of times the criticism and stonewalling will kind of go hand in hand, right? One will be critical, shuts the other one down, and the more shut down they are, the more critical they get. And then of course you factor in defensiveness as to why they're doing what they're doing. So both of those need to be taken seriously, because it's when the 4th one shows up on the scene that it's very, very difficult to save a marriage, and that's contempt. By the time you have contempt for each other, by the time that you hate each other, it is really hard to turn things around. And so I really urge you to reflect on yourself and your marriage and say, is there anywhere where I'm defensive? Is there anywhere where it seems like my spouse is defensive? Look and say, is there anywhere I'm being critical? Is there anywhere where I'm shut down or stonewalling? And really be on guard for any sense of contempt, because that is the final death knell. It's like you need to really pay attention to any feelings of contempt creeping in, and you got to do something to turn things around as quickly as possible. So since we're in the topic of gender differences, I want to also factor in a gender component. It may not always be true, but again, it tends to be true. Women tend to be more notorious for being critical and nitpicky. Women tend to criticize, which is that fault finding, judging, pointing out when another person makes a mistake. The question is why? Why are women much more likely, or at least stereotypically so, to be judgmental and critical? Well, it goes back to being detail oriented. She's scanning the environment for those relational dynamics, those relational cues. Remember, she's the barometer of the relationship. And she also filters her world through relationship and emotions. So she's going to catch when little things are off. She's going to recognize that that's a threat, that that's a concern. And that needs to be heeded. Okay. A lot of times, men, because they don't see it or pick up on it, they'll dismiss it or ignore it. And if they were to heed that warning, they would be able to kind of head things off early, rather than, ignoring it, deflecting it, and just letting it continue to get worse and worse. On the flip side, yes, women, like I said already, can also be more sensitive, and they can be nitpicking and being, too nitpicky. They can be, too focused on their details and too rigid about their expectations. Another reason why women tend to be critical and nitpicky is because they care deeply and they want things to be better. They actually do want to help. The problem is sometimes that desire to help comes across as criticism when it's not meant to. And that's a very common thing I hear women say. Well, I don't mean to be critical. I don't mean for it to sound critical or condemning. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help. But for some men, even the littlest of things, even a complaint instead of a criticism, can still be received and perceived as a criticism, especially the more defensive he is. So that's going to be on the men's side. Their homework is, she needs to turn down the sensitivity on her details and the rigidity of her interpretation of things. But you also need to turn down your sensitivity to when she has something difficult to say, when she identifies a problem, when she shares a concern. You got to learn to tolerate that and hear it for what it is and not automatically receive it as a criticism. Finally, a woman's primary need is security. So if something is out of place, if something's done incorrectly, if something is overlooked or forgotten, that starts to trigger alarm bells within her. And so if she starts to feel like she's not having that security, that something feels unstable or threatened or insecure, again, she's going to scan and look for what that is and try to fix it and rectify it. And if it happens to be something that's intangible, internal, emotional, relational, don't dismiss it, guys. Like, just because it's not obvious or apparent to you, you need to trust her instincts and trust her alarm bells, just like she needs to do you when you're pointing out situational awareness and, hey, don't be walking out to your car digging into your purse, and hey, don't go walking by yourself like where there's no lights, or you know what I'm saying? Like, there are things that men are very keen and aware of that they get aggravated with their wives for not heeding or paying attention. This is no different. Okay. All right, so the gender specific horseman for men is stonewalling. That doesn't mean women won't stonewall. They can stonewall with the best of them. But again, tendencies and preferences. So men tend to stonewall or intentionally resist or block what the other person wants. Now, it can show up as a complete emotional withdrawal, a total shutdown, but it can also show up as anger, in these other ways where it's like, I'm not engaging, right? And especially not engaging emotionally. So why is that? Go back to that right amygdala, emotional center, reciprocally inhibiting each other. The more that right amygdala is triggered, that there's a threat, there's a problem, more likely it is the emotions are going to shut down. He's going to guard up. He's going to wall up. Now, a lot of the times that's unintentional. It is part of your survival instinct. But as soon as you recognize what's happening, your brain can override those instincts and you can re-engage. He may feel that he lacks the ability or the confidence to deal with emotional things. It's a very common thing for men to not like feeling incompetent, unprepared. They especially don't want to fail, right? I mean, in relationships and marriage, they don't want to fail. And so because he tends to be a guy that's much stronger on that spectrum of right amygdala, left IPL, logical, task oriented, all these things, the emotional side may be foreign and in some ways may even be intimidating. And so that can be another reason why there's an avoidance. And again, I want to encourage men to develop that. You have a left amygdala. Okay, start to use it. It's like learning to write with your left hand. It's going to be weird. It's not going to be as easy, and it's never going to look as good or be as natural. But that doesn't mean you neglect it or negate it. And with your marriage, no, that might be one of the only places and the opportunities where you have to fully express yourself and explore all these different qualities that are there. They just may be atrophied, right? They just may be underutilized. And so that's one reason why men may shut down, is that it's just uncomfortable and it's odd and foreign. If he's focusing on logic, she's being emotional. She may seem irrational to him. And so he's just shutting her down and dismissing her because she's being irrational. And I've already spoken to that. Make sure you look past that. Again, men are hardwired to work, achieve, and provide. That means some men, as I've already said, have a very hard time feeling like they're failing or feeling incompetent. And that can be why they shut down. Okay, so what the horsemen do to the relationship? Well, instead of supporting and helping, she's criticizing. And instead of protecting and providing, he's shutting down on her and stonewalling, right? Well, look at how that corresponds to the primary emotional needs. If he needs respect and encouragement, instead of getting that support and help from her, he's now getting criticism. And if she's needing love and security, instead of getting that through his protection and provision, he's now shutting down, shutting her off, stonewalling her. And to me, I compare this to, those days when we were children and we would run down on Christmas morning and we're looking and hoping for that gift in the stocking. This is like, instead of finding the stocking empty, you find it full of coal. Like, it's I think detrimental, especially over long periods of time. And if this becomes the pattern. So we really need to be mindful of being critical and of stonewalling. So when the horsemen persist, they're not taken care of, they're not addressed when they show up. Well, what happens? Well, she may be left to languish in the relationship. She may leave. She may turn to her friends or her extended family. She may focus on a job or a hobby. She may be vulnerable to the compliments of another man. Many times I see these women become overly attached to their children. They become dependent upon their kids needing them, and they focus all their energy into their role as mother, because at least she feels secure in that relationship. What about him? He may also stay and languish in the relationship. Again, he may leave altogether. But most of the time, I see men start to completely focus on their job or a hobby or some other place where he feels competent and confident. He may become a workaholic because he's striving for the accolades and the respect he's not getting from his wife. He may become vulnerable to the adoration of another woman, particularly one at work, who is cheering him on and cheering on his successes. Emotional affairs often go unaddressed, but their effects can actually be more damaging than sexual affairs. So what do? Well, we need to reduce the bad at the same time that we're enhancing the good. How do we do that? We address the horsemen. That's the quickest way to start reducing the bad, is start dealing with those horsemen. Avoid the communication busters that I go over in more detail in the love and communication lesson. Focus on communicating honestly, openly, and directly. Okay, that's going to help reduce the bad. Avoid turning away and turning against communication styles. Make and receive repair attempts. And then how do we enhance the good? Intentionally meet emotional needs. Make that your priority. Make that your responsibility. Become bilingual, learn each other's love languages, but also learn to understand each other's gender-specific ways of processing information, of communicating, of problem solving, and learn to recognize each other's cues. Become how do I put it? Be a student of your mate. Okay, so learn your partner, learn your wife, learn your husband, learn what's unique to them. We need to focus on being turning toward in our communication style as much as possible. Stay engaged, stay receptive, stay responsive. And finally, we need to maintain intimacy on all 4 levels: mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. We need to work on building that consummate love where we have passion, intimacy, and commitment. We have the 3 loves from the Bible. We have all of them: eros, phileo, and agape. And that's something that's going to be important if you're going to have the most edifying, fulfilling, meaningful marriage possible. So again, resources, if you want to go deeper into it, would include my book on marriage. It's called No Longer Two, A Guide to How God Created Men, Women, and Marriage. It's available on Amazon. And the information I have on here about communication bids, communication busters, and the 4 horsemen can be found in John Gottman's book called The Relationship Cure. So I hope this information was helpful to you. I hope it's encouraging. I hope it gives you some direction on how to just continually get better in your connection, your communication, your understanding of each other. And especially as you are both committed to the Lord and committed to being godly, Christ-like, Christ-centered husbands and wives, a Christ-centered marriage. I know that this information can be applicable in a number of ways. So don't let this be just a one-time thing. Let this be something that maybe you revisit and you return to, because it really can be helpful, and its helpfulness can change depending upon the stage of life, depending upon the ebb and flow of life. So take this information and apply it where you can now, but then just know that it continue to become useful and helpful in other ways as you grow old together. And as I have said before, marriage is do or die trying, and you ain't dead yet. And so I hope this information helps you to continue to keep on trying.